The fundamental law of nature, the principle that best explains how the world works, is actions have consequences. For every action, there is always a reaction and consequences that follow. When people lose the connection between their actions and the consequences of those actions, they lose their hold on reality. Our animal natures tend to respond primarily to what we see and hear in the present moment. We have a tendency to overreact to present circumstances. The latest news report, the opinions and actions of those around us, whatever seems most dramatic at the time stirs up our emotions, compelling us to do something. We rush in to take action before we know all the facts, and often make things worse. There is more to any situation than we can see. In the present moment we lack perspective. Every event is connected to something that happened before. The problems you face right now have their roots in the past. And our response to a problem has consequences that ripple into the future. So before we react to what we see in front of us, we need to slow down and elevate our perspective. Imagine you are in a thick forest at the base of a mountain. You are surrounded by tall trees and have no way of getting your bearings. You can only see what is in front of you. You're not exactly sure where you are, in what direction you're moving, and where you need to go to get to your destination. So you start walking up the side of the mountain, and as you do you start to see the wider landscape. You realize that when you were surrounded by trees your idea about where you were, was wrong. As you ascend to the top of the mountain, a panoramic view of the landscape spreads out in front of you. With this elevated perspective you understand clearly where you are and where you need to go. When you are locked into the present moment it's like living on the base of the mountain. We have a limited vision of reality. The passage of time is like a slow ascent up the mountain. Time reveals reality, it gives us perspective. With time we gain more information and see more of the truth. The more time that goes by after the fact, the more accurate our perspective becomes. But does the wisdom of hindsight do us any good after the fact? It's too late, we have reacted in the moment and can't change what we have done. But it is possible to turn your hindsight into foresight. We can manufacture the effect of time and give ourselves an elevated view in the present moment. Here's how we do it. First, when faced with a conflict, problem, or exciting opportunity we learn to get some distance from the present moment. The foundation of power is the ability to control your emotions. We want to cool down our fear, anger, or excitement before we decide on a course of action, so we detach ourselves from the heat of the moment. Next, we want to take a deeper look at the source of the problem. We don't take the immediate explanation that grabs our attention but consider other possibilities, other motivations for the people involved. We look for the big picture, trying to get a wider perspective on the overall context of the situation. We think of any possible negative consequences for the strategies we are considering. We imagine how a problem or an apparent opportunity would play out over time. Are there potentially bigger problems down the road we are overlooking? Now we need to remind ourselves of our long-term goals. We must align any decision with what we really want. Our long-term goals dictate what we do, or don't do. Always think of your overall objective and the consequences of every action, no matter how small it may be. As we go through this process, certain options and explanations will seem more logical than those we first thought of. Now, add on to this the lessons we have learned over the years about our own patterns of behavior. While this process of elevating our perspective cannot duplicate the effect of passing time, it can come close. In truth, this elevated perspective is rare and takes hard work. You see, human brains are hardwired for short-term thinking. Our early ancestors had to be alert for immediate danger and notice any opportunity for food. We are built to respond to what is here and now, and to seek out instant gratification. This is why we give more attention to something like terrorism than to a long-term problem like global warming. It's also why people smoke, drink and do drugs. We tend to grab for instant gratification even when we know about the negative long-term consequences. Short-term thinking is the most damaging aspect of modern society. And it's only getting worse as the new technology makes our attention spans shorter. We get caught up in a reactive way of living, we swing from excitement to fear to panic as we react to dramatic news stories. We grab all the instant gratification we can and ignore the consequences. We are giving in to the most primitive and potentially destructive aspects of our nature. To live a successful life, we must consider the consequences of our actions and think long term. If possible, avoid deep contact with those who are in continual reactive mode, and strive to associate with those who have a far-sighted perspective. So how do we overcome short-sighted thinking in our own lives? The first step is awareness. We think we are rational long-term thinkers because we have a few goals. But these goals are often more like hopes and wishes. These vague goals get swept under the rug in the rush of immediate events. Most of the time we are improvising and reacting to life as it happens. The best way to overcome this is recognizing the clear signs of short-sighted thinking. Let's take a look at 4 signs of short-sighted thinking, and strategies to overcome them. Number 1. Short-sighted thinking can result in unintended consequences. History is full of examples of this all too common phenomenon. It was the 1800s and India was under British colonial rule. The citizens of Delhi were plagued by an infestation of venomous cobras. So the British bureaucrats had the idea of offering a handsome bounty on dead cobras. It looked like their plan worked as locals started to bring in cobras. After a while it was noticed that although the number of dead cobras being brought in for bounty was on the rise, the number of live cobras in the streets had plateaued and was no longer going down. What had happened was entrepreneurial citizens had begun breeding cobras to turn in for the bounty, which was much easier than hunting wild cobras. The government eventually figured this out and shut down the bounty program. The cobra breeders were not happy, of course, and released all their cobras onto the streets, tripling the number of pre-bounty cobras. Another example of short-sighted thinking is the 1920s prohibition of alcohol in the United States. Instead of curbing alcohol consumption, it substantially increased it. Then there is the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. Instead of crippling the United States naval force, it awoke the sleeping giant out of isolation and geared up its war machine that eventually decimated Japan. We can find less dramatic examples of short-sighted thinking in daily life. Alarmed by something in the present, we react instead of thinking about the context, the roots of the problem, and the possible unintended consequences that might result. We grab for a simple solution. Our actions are based on insufficient evidence. In all these cases, a simple move partway up the mountain would have made clear the possible unintended consequences so obvious to us now. For example, offering a hefty bounty on dead cobras would cause poverty-stricken citizens to breed them. People's thinking is often too simple and lazy. Understand that the world and its people are by nature complex. Any action sets off a chain reaction of events that are out of your control. Especially when more people get involved, it's hard to predict their motivations and responses. But by thinking deeper about the possible consequences of an action, you can thwart disaster. Often when you think this way, you come to the conclusion that it's better to do nothing, to wait. Number 2. Short-sighted thinking results in fighting pointless ego-based battles. When you lose sight of your long-term goals, it's easy to get pulled into pointless drama. And believe me, there are many people who want to take you there. Did someone disrespect you? Or deliberately try and mess with you? Well, forget about it. Keep your ego and emotions in check. Getting caught up in petty squabbles will move you away from what you really want, your long-term objectives. Certain battles are not worth fighting, a waste of valuable time and energy. Realize that those who try to antagonize you are losers, they are not pursuing anything worthwhile. It's your job to stay focused on what really matters. Elevate your perspective and think strategically. Avoid pointless skirmishes, focus on winning the war, which is achieving the long-term vision you have for your life. Number 3. Short-sighted thinking creates a nervous impatience. Making our attention spans shrink, cell phone culture gives us a dopamine hit with instant news and a constant Twitter feed. We feel connected to life as it is happening around us, and this need to know instantly spills over into everyday life. This nervous impatience impacts our thinking and we don't realize it. We are so focused on the immediate, the micro-trends, locked into the unending push towards what's new, that we lose sight of the important larger trends and make bad decisions. To make things worse, we see others reacting to any negative or positive sign in the present, and it becomes hard not to get caught up in the panic or excitement of the crowd. We become reactive, feeling a need to take immediate action based on incomplete information. The outcome of most situations in life are determined over the long term. When facing any problem or obstacle, the best approach is to slow things down, step back, and wait a day or two before taking any action. We must always have a clear image of what we want to accomplish, and how we are going to do it. Assess the strengths and weaknesses of everyone involved, and be ready for the emotional overreactions of those around you. Finally, we need to have resolve, and a belief that in the end, we will win. And number 4. Short-sighted thinking can result in getting lost in trivia. It's so easy to gather information today, but there is no trivia in a strategic mind. What information you consider should be determined by your priorities, your long-term goals, by what really matters in the end. Trying to take in every detail only leads to confusion, everything begins to seem equally important. Filter out information by how important it relates to accomplishing your long-term objectives. Weed out the essential from the non-essential. Spend your time on things that matter, the crux of the issue, the point or points upon which success or failure rests. Delegation makes it easier for you to spend more of your time on the crux of the issue. You can't control everything. The best way to stay in control is to have a realistic assessment of your situation, to clearly see the truth, which is almost impossible if your mind is filled with trivia.